You breathe one word of what you heard, I will make sure no one ever finds you. Not you, not your little girl. The picture shattered against the wall. Water soaked through Rachel's uniform as she knelt on the floor, hands bleeding, surrounded by broken porcelain. Isabella stood over her, calm as stone, like a woman who had done this before and would do it again without losing a night of sleep. She was supposed to be the future Mrs. Caruso. White roses were already in the car. A wedding contract was already signed. And the man she was marrying had no idea his bride had a husband and a plan to put him in the ground. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. Vincent Caruso had not planned to come home early. He had been sitting in the back of his car for 20 minutes outside a florist on Michigan Avenue, doing something he almost never did anymore, second-guessing himself. The white roses were his idea. The private wedding contract tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket was his idea too. Everything about tonight was supposed to be his idea, his timeline, his announcement. That was how Vincent operated. He decided and the world adjusted. But somewhere between the florist and the iron gates of his estate on the north side of Chicago, something shifted in him. Not a warning, not a feeling he could name, just a stillness that didn't belong to a man who was supposed to be celebrating. He told his driver to take the east entrance. The guards on duty that evening saw his car and opened the gate without a word. That was also how Vincent operated. Nobody asked questions, nobody needed to. The Caruso estate had 42 rooms, 16 full-time staff members, and a security rotation. So precise that 3 former military contractors had designed it, and one of them had cried when he saw how clean the system was. Vincent had built his empire on the belief that if you controlled every variable, nothing could touch you. I was carrying the roses himself when he pushed through the side door into the east corridor. He got maybe 15 feet before something small and fast came around the corner and crashed into his legs with enough force to make him stagger backward. It was a child. She couldn't have been older than 7. Small face, dark braided hair, and eyes so wide and wet that for a half second, Vincent didn't understand what he was looking at. His 2 guards behind him reached forward instinctively, reaching for the child, reaching to pull her away, and Vincent put one arm out to stop them without even thinking about it. The little girl grabbed the lapel of his jacket with both fists. "Please," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Please, mister. Please help my mama. Please." Vincent went completely still. In 20 years of building what he built, of negotiating with dangerous men, in dangerous rooms, of sitting across tables from people who wanted him dead and watching them blink first in all of that, nothing had ever stopped him the way those 2 words did. "Please help my mama." He crouched down to her level. Behind him, he heard his guards shifting their weight, uncomfortable. Men in his world did not crouch down to talk to frightened children. Men in his world did not stand still in hallways, holding white roses while a 7-year-old shook against them. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mia." The word came out broken, like she'd been crying for a while before she ran into him. "Mia Bennett." "Okay, Mia." He kept his voice flat, steady, the same voice he used in negotiations when the other side didn't know what he was thinking. "Tell me what happened." "The beautiful lady." Mia's grip tightened on his jacket. "She was yelling at my mama, and she said she was going to make us disappear. Both of us. She said nobody would find us." The child pulled in a ragged breath. "And my mama told me to run. She said run and find someone, and I didn't know where to go, and then I found you." Vincent stood up slowly. He handed the roses to the guard on his left. The man took them without a word. "Which room?" Vincent said. "She has the room with all the windows," Mia said. "The one that smells like flowers." Isabella's suite, the east wing 3rd floor corner room that caught the afternoon light. Isabella had chosen it herself 6 months ago when she first started staying at the estate. She'd said it reminded her of a room she had as a child, and Vincent had nodded and told his staff to give her whatever she wanted, because that was what a man did when he was planning to spend his life with someone. He crossed the corridor without looking back. He knew Mia was following him. He could hear the small, rapid sound of her footsteps behind his. One of his guards fell in beside him and started to say something about protocol, and Vincent silenced him with a look. They could hear it before they reached the 3rd floor landing. Not screaming, something worse than screaming. A voice low and controlled and terrifyingly certain of itself, and under that voice the sound of something breaking. Vincent slowed his pace at the top of the stairs. He had learned a long time ago that information was worth more than presence. You did not walk into a room until you understood what kind of room it was. He stopped 6 feet from the door to Isabella's suite. It was half open. He could see a strip of the room through the gap, and what he saw was enough to make something cold and certain settle into his chest. Rachel Bennett was on her knees. I knew who Rachel was. She had worked in the estate for 3 years. She was quiet, efficient, invisible in the way that competent people become invisible in large households. She kept to herself. She showed up on time. She never caused problems, and she never asked for anything beyond her salary and the small apartment in the staff quarters where she lived with her daughter. Vincent had probably spoken 20 words to her in 3 years, maybe 30. She existed at the edges of his household, the way most household staff did, necessary, present, and completely overlooked. She was soaked through from the shoulders down. Her uniform was drenched, her hair flattened against her face, her hands pressed against the floor to keep herself upright. Shards of porcelain were scattered across the floor around her white against the dark hardwood pieces of what had been an expensive pitcher. A pitcher that had clearly been full of water before it became a weapon. Isabella stood over her. Isabella Whitmore, the woman he had driven across the city tonight to surprise with white roses and a wedding contract, was standing over Rachel. With her shoulders back and her chin raised, and the expression on her face was not anger. It was colder than anger. It was the expression of someone who had already decided what this person beneath her was worth, and the number was 0. She hadn't heard him yet. You have no idea, Isabella was saying, and her voice was so composed that it made Vincent's teeth clench. What kind of trouble you have created for yourself. Women like you spend their entire lives cleaning up after people like me, and that is the natural order of things. You know what happens to women like you who forget that? Rachel said nothing. They disappear, Isabella said, quietly, without anyone asking questions, because no one cares enough to ask. Vincent pushed the door fully open. Isabella turned, and in the first fraction of a second before she reorganized her expression, he saw it. Not guilt. She was too controlled for guilt. What he saw was calculation. An immediate reflexive calculation of how much he had heard and what the best explanation was going to be. She landed on an answer in under 2 seconds. He watched her reach it. Vincent? She moved toward him, and her voice shifted, the warmth returning like a switch being thrown. I'm so glad you're here. I've been waiting to tell you. I caught this woman going through my jewelry. She's been stealing from me. I came in and found her with her hands in my jewelry case. And when I confronted her, she became hostile, and I had to stop, Vincent said. One word, no inflection, just a wall. Isabella stopped. He looked past her at Rachel. Rachel had not moved from the floor. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not quite fear, not quite hope, something guarded and exhausted and very carefully controlled. There was a cut on her palm from one of the pieces of porcelain. She was bleeding, and she hadn't said a word about it. He looked at Mia, who had followed him upstairs and was now standing in the doorway behind him, clutching the back of his jacket with both hands and staring at her mother. Then he looked back at Isabella. You're telling me, he said, that a woman who earns $14 an hour cleaning rooms in this house snuck into your suite to steal jewelry in the middle of the afternoon while you were here. People do desperate things, Isabella said smoothly. She has a child to support. I understand the impulse, but that doesn't make it acceptable. I think you should call security and have her removed from Mia, Vincent said without turning around. Yeah, the child's voice was very small. Go back downstairs, find Marco at the front desk and tell him I said to get you something warm to eat and to stay with you until I come down. Can you do that? A pause. What about my mama? I'm going to talk to your mama right now, he said. She's going to be fine. I need you to go with Marco. Another pause. Then he felt the grip on his jacket release. He heard the small footsteps retreat down the hallway. He waited until they were gone before he looked at Rachel again. Get up, he said, not harsh, just direct. There's glass everywhere. Get off the floor. Rachel got up, carefully avoiding the larger pieces. She stood with her hands at her sides and blood moving slowly down her left palm and her eyes steady on his face. Tell me what happened, he said, from the beginning. Isabella made a sound. Vincent, you can't seriously be asking this woman to. I'm not talking to you right now. He said it the same way he would have said it to anyone who had interrupted him during a negotiation. Flat, final, absolutely certain of itself. I'll talk to you when I'm ready. He watched Isabella's jaw tighten. He watched her decide very quickly that this was not the moment to push. She crossed to the window and stood with her back to the room, and he could see from the set of her shoulders that she was already working on her next approach. Rachel took a slow breath. I was bringing tea, she said. I knocked. Nobody answered. The door was already open and the tea was going to get cold, so I came in to set it on the side table. I was going to leave right away. But I heard her on the phone and she stopped. Keep going, Vincent said. She was on the phone with someone. Rachel's voice was very quiet, but it didn't waver. She said a name. She said Caleb. She said she had the security rotation and the guard changes, and that the meeting after the engagement dinner would work and that you'd be alone when he got there. She paused again. She said he was going to love her for this. The room went completely still. Vincent heard Isabella exhale at the window. He didn't look at her. I knew the name Caleb. He had known the name Caleb for 11 years, since a partnership that had ended in a warehouse fire in Detroit that 3 men had not walked out of. Since a transfer of money that had gone somewhere it was never supposed to go. Since a threat that had been delivered through channels that Vincent had spent 2 years dismantling. Caleb Rourke, a man who as of last year was supposed to be in federal custody pending trial on racketeering charges. A man whose case had gone quiet in a way that made Vincent uneasy every time he thought about it. A man who had every reason in the world to want Vincent in a room alone. He still didn't look at Isabella. Was there anything else, he said to Rachel. Anything else you heard? Rachel looked at him for a moment, then at Isabella's back, then back at him. She said he was her husband, Rachel said. The man on the phone. She called him my husband. And there it was. Vincent finally looked at Isabella. She had turned from the window. And now the calculation was gone from her face, completely gone, and what was left underneath it was something much more complicated. Something that might have been fear and might have been grief and might have been the expression of a person who had been carrying something so heavy for so long that they had forgotten they were carrying it at all. Bella, he said, and he used the name he had called her since the beginning, the name that had felt like intimacy and now felt like a question. Look at me. She looked at him. How long, he said. She didn't answer. How long has Caleb Rourke been your husband? The silence lasted 4 seconds. He counted them. 9 years, Isabella said. And her voice for the first time all evening had no performance in it at all. Vincent crossed to the door and called for his head of security without raising his voice. Jack appeared at the end of the corridor. In under 30 seconds, Vincent had hired him partly because he moved like that, like a man who existed in a permanent state of readiness. Get a medical kit up here, Vincent said, and get 2 of my people on that door. He looked at Isabella. Nobody leaves this room until I say so. Isabella's expression flickered. Vincent, I need you to let me explain. You'll get to explain, he said. I promise you that, but first I need to verify one thing. He pulled out his phone and called his legal consultant directly. It was past 7 in the evening, and the man answered on the second ring because that was what people who work for Vincent Caruso did. Marriage records, Vincent said. Isabella Whitmore. Run it against a Caleb Rourke. I need it in 15 minutes. He hung up and stood in the doorway of the room that had been designed to feel like home and looked at the woman he had been planning to marry and the housekeeper she had been threatening on her knees, and he felt the particular specific grief of a man who has discovered that the house he was building was constructed on someone else's lie. I didn't feel betrayed yet. Betrayal came later once the facts were arranged. What he felt right now was the cold, functional clarity of a man who had survived for 20 years by dealing with things as they actually were. Rachel was wrapping a cloth around her palm. She had found it herself from a drawer. She had not asked anyone for anything. He watched her do this without really meaning to watch. There was something in the economy of it, the way she moved without drama or self-pity, taking care of herself because no one else was going to, that snagged his attention in a way he couldn't explain. Sit down, he said, not a command, something closer to an instruction. You don't have to stand. Rachel looked at the chairs in the room and then looked at Isabella and then looked back at him. I'd rather stand, she said. He almost said something. Then he didn't. She had earned the right to stand wherever she wanted in this room. His phone rang 17 minutes later, 2 minutes past his deadline, which he noted without expression. It was his legal consultant. "The records are real," the man said. "Isabella Claire Whitmore married Caleb Andrew Rourke 9 years ago in Lake County. The marriage was never dissolved. There's no divorce filing, no annulment, no legal separation on record." A pause. Pause. "Vincent, if you were planning to—" "I know," Vincent said. "Keep this between us tonight." He hung up. The roses were downstairs in a corridor somewhere in the hands of a guard who had no idea what to do with them. The wedding contract was in his jacket pocket. The engagement celebration he had been planning for 3 months was scheduled for 2 weeks from tonight, and every single element of it, the guest list, the venue, the private announcement, had been fed unknowingly and completely to a man who wanted him dead. He looked at Isabella. "Your father," he said. "Was he part of this?" The silence was its own answer. Isabella. "Yes." She said it like swallowing something that hurt. "Caleb was part of my father's political network before they were married. My father had debts, financial, political, the kind that don't get settled in courts. He gave Caleb the marriage to clear them." She stopped. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and they were very still, the way hands get still when the person controlling them is working very hard not to let them shake. "I was 22. Vincent said nothing. "When I left," she continued, "I spent 4 years hiding from him. Then he found me, and he told me what would happen to my father and to me if I didn't help him." She looked at Vincent, and something in her eyes was raw in a way that didn't fit the woman he thought he knew. "He said all he wanted was your signature on shipping transfers and offshore accounts. He said if I got him a moment alone with you, just a moment, just enough to force the signatures, he would let me go." "And you believed him," Vincent said. A long beat. "I wanted to," she said. "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." Rachel had said nothing during this entire exchange. Vincent was aware of her the way you become aware of a very still person in a room, not because she was doing anything, but because the quality of her stillness was different from ordinary stillness. She was listening, filing everything away. The expression on her face was not satisfaction, and it was not vindication. It was something more careful than both of those. He turned to her. "The call you overheard, the engagement dinner. She mentioned the boathouse." Rachel looked at him steadily. "The old one," she said. "The one by the north end of the property that isn't used anymore. She said after the dinner you would be brought there." And she used the word brought. She paused to make sure he understood what she meant by that. Not invited, brought. Vincent absorbed this. The old Caruso boathouse. His grandfather had built it in 1964, and it had been closed for 11 years since a winter storm had taken out part of the roof. The property's survey maps showed a drainage tunnel beneath it, a service passage that had been sealed in the 80s and that Vincent had never thought about once in his adult life. Never thought about. Until now. "There was also something else," Rachel said. "I don't know if it matters." "Say it," he said. She hesitated, then reached into her uniform pocket and produced something small and brass, setting it on the edge of the side table between them. A key. Oh, the kind that didn't fit modern locks, with a pattern at the top that was decorative as much as functional. It fell out of her sleeve Rachel paused. "During the confrontation. I picked it up without thinking. I don't know what it opens." Vincent picked it up. He knew what it opened. He had found an identical key in his grandfather's study 20 years ago, in a cigar box under a false bottom in a desk drawer. He had been 23 years old and newly in charge of the estate after his father's death, and he'd held that key and wondered what it was. And one of the old staff members, a man who had been with the family for 40 years, had told him it was the key to the service tunnel under the boathouse. The man had said it with the casual tone of someone describing something completely ordinary, as if everyone knew about the tunnel, as if anyone would care. Vincent had put the key back in the box and forgotten about it. Someone had told Caleb about the tunnel. Someone had given Caleb a key. He set the small brass thing down on his palm and looked at it for a moment, and then he closed his fingers around it, and he crossed the room to where Isabella stood by the window, and he held it up between them. She looked at it, then she looked at him. "He found it in my family's records," she said. "Property surveys from when your grandfather sold part of the North Shoreline to my father in 1987. The tunnel is on those maps. He had a copy of the key made from the description in the original property documents." "When did you give it to him?" She looked at the key. "Last week." He put it in his jacket pocket next to the wedding contract. He walked to the door. "Jack," he said. Jack appeared immediately. "We have a problem," Vincent said, "and I need 12 hours to deal with it before it becomes a catastrophe." He looked back at the room at Isabella by the window, at Rachel standing with her wrapped hand and her exhausted, steady eyes at the porcelain pieces still on the floor. "Get me clean intelligence on every catering vendor contracted for the engagement dinner. Cross-reference the employee manifests against anyone with any connection at all, to Caleb Rourke's organization." He paused. "And I want new guards on every entrance before midnight. Our people. Nobody from the rotation that Isabella would have had access to." Jack didn't ask questions. He said, "Understood," and moved. Vincent looked at Rachel one last time. She had sat down on the edge of a chair by the far wall finally, and she was looking at the window with an expression he couldn't read. She wasn't looking at him. She wasn't performing composure for his benefit. She was just sitting with whatever she was sitting with, in the way of a person accustomed to sitting with hard things alone. "Mrs. Bennett," he said. She looked at him. "I'm going to offer you and your daughter protection," he said. "Secure quarters on the East Wing, not the staff room, something private. 2 of my best people outside the door. Nobody gets near either of you." She looked at him for a long moment. Her face was still and careful, and he had the odd feeling again of being evaluated, not in a threatening way, but in the way that a person evaluates a thing they need to trust but aren't sure they should. "Thank you," she said, "but I'd like to think about it." He frowned slightly. In his experience, people either accepted protection or they didn't understand the danger. Mrs. Bennett, the man who, "I understand the danger," she said. Her voice was quiet and completely even. "I understood it when she told me she would make my daughter disappear. I'm not confused about what's happening." A pause. "I just need to think about what kind of safe feels safe to me. Because there's safe behind a locked door with armed men I can't refuse, and then there's actually safe. And those two things aren't always the same thing." Vincent stood in the doorway and looked at her and did not have a ready answer for that. It had been a long time since anyone had said something to him that he did not have a ready answer for. "Take whatever time you need," he said finally. "The offer stands." He walked out of the suite and pulled the door most of the way closed behind him and stood in the corridor for a moment in the particular silence of a man whose evening has gone somewhere completely unplanned and who is deciding very deliberately what to do next. The contract in his jacket pocket pressed against his ribs when he breathed. He reached in and took it out, looked at it for a moment, the formal language, the date he'd imagined circling in red on a calendar, the signature line at the bottom where he had pictured Isabella's name. He folded it once and slid it into the inside pocket of Jack's jacket when the man appeared again at the end of the corridor. "Get rid of that," he said. Jack didn't ask what it was. Downstairs in the kitchen, Marco was sitting next to a 7-year-old girl with braided hair, letting her eat crackers and draw on a notepad while he sat perfectly still beside her. When Vincent appeared in the doorway, Marco looked up. Mia did not look up. She was concentrating very seriously on her drawing. Vincent walked in and sat down across the table from her. After a moment, she looked up at him. Her eyes were still red from crying, but she was calmer now, and there was something in the way she looked at him, direct and solemn, and not entirely trusting, that made him think she was considerably older than 7 in the ways that actually mattered. "Is my mama okay?" she asked. "Your mama is fine," he said, "and she's safe, I promise." Mia studied him. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" I thought about this. In 20 years, nobody had asked him to prove he was telling the truth. People in his world either believed him or they didn't, and the consequences of the latter were sufficient motivation. "You don't," he said. "Not yet, but I'd like the chance to show you." Mia considered this. Then she turned back to her drawing and continued working on it with great concentration. He sat there for a few minutes without speaking. Around him, the estate hummed with the quiet, coordinated movement of his people doing their work. Jack redirecting security rotations, his intelligence contact cross-referencing, employment records, 2 of his trusted men taking positions outside the East Wing, the machinery of his world turning over, absorbing the new information, reconfiguring itself. And in the middle of it, a 7-year-old girl drawing pictures at a kitchen table, and a man who ran one of the most feared organizations in Chicago, sitting quietly across from her, doing nothing. He wasn't sure why he stayed, but he stayed. Outside the kitchen window, the Chicago night pressed against the glass, and somewhere beneath the north end of the property, A tunnel waited in the dark with a story nobody had thought to tell in 40 years until a woman on her knees with blood on her hand had picked up a small brass key and put it in her pocket without knowing what it meant. Vincent reached into his jacket one more time. His hand found the empty space where the wedding contract had been. He left it empty. The intelligence report landed on Vincent's desk at 11:47 that night. He had been awake since before the roses. He would be awake until long after this was over. That was something people who worked for him understood without being told when Vincent Caruso was dealing with a problem. Sleep was a variable he simply subtracted from the equation until the problem was resolved. Jack set the folder on the desk without a word and stood back. He knew better than to summarize. Vincent preferred to read. The first page confirmed what Rachel had heard. Call logs reconstructed from a device sweep of Isabella's suite showed 4 separate conversations over the past 3 weeks between Isabella's private number and a prepaid cell registered to a shell company in Nevada. The shell company dissolved 2 days after the last call. But the technical team had already traced the calls to a tower cluster on the south side of Chicago, Caleb Rourke's last known territory before his federal case went quiet. The second page was worse. Isabella Whitmore had no employment history before the age of 26. Her identity, before that, the one that appeared on the marriage certificate from Lake County, belonged to a woman named Isabella Carver, a name she had legally shed through a court filing in Indiana citing domestic threat. The filing was sealed. Someone had unsealed it tonight on Vincent's authority, and the story it contained was not short. She had been 19 when her father introduced her to Caleb, 22 when they married. The domestic threat filing referenced 3 hospital visits in 2 years under the name Carver. None of them were accidents. Vincent read this page twice. He did not soften toward her, but he put the page down more carefully than he put down the others. The catering vendors, he said. Jack moved to the second folder. 3 of the 5 contracted vendors for the engagement dinner have employees who cross-reference against Rourke's network. 2 of them go back 9 years. They were part of his logistics operation in Detroit. He paused. One of the floral companies placed an order for white lilies under a company name that doesn't exist. 40 arrangements, prepaid and cash delivery, scheduled for the engagement night. White lilies, Vincent repeated. Yes. Not white roses. No, lilies. Jack said it carefully because he understood what Vincent was asking. Vincent had specified white roses for every public event connected to Isabella since the beginning. Whoever ordered the lilies didn't know that or didn't care because they weren't ordering flowers for a celebration. They were ordering them for something else. Lilies were for funerals. Get me the delivery window, Vincent said. 7 to 9 p.m., 2 hours before the engagement dinner was scheduled to end. 2 hours before Vincent would have been moved alone to the boathouse. He sat back in his chair. The brass key was on the desk in front of him. He had been looking at it intermittently all evening, the way you look at something small that contains a large answer. Isabella said Caleb told her the plan was to force signatures. Vincent said, shipping routes, offshore accounts. That's what she said, Jack confirmed. Run the recovered communications again. All of them. Tell me if at any point Caleb's messages mention Isabella surviving the night. Jack was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. I already checked, he said. He doesn't mention it. Right, Vincent said. The room held that information for a moment. Caleb had promised Isabella her freedom. He had never intended to give it to her. She was a tool, an expensive, complicated tool, and the moment she finished her function, she became a liability. Vincent understood this logic with a cold familiarity, because it was the same logic that had governed his world for 20 years. He had never applied it to people who trusted him, but he had watched other men do it without hesitation, and he recognized the architecture of the plan, the way you recognize a building you have walked past 100 times. He stood up and walked to the window. She knows, he said, more to himself than to Jack. She might not have let herself believe it, but she knows. Jack said nothing. She confessed to me because some part of her has already accepted that Caleb is going to kill her, Vincent said. She confessed because she doesn't have any other move. Does that change what we do? Jack asked. Vincent looked at the window. Chicago below him spread out and dark and completely indifferent. It changes how I talk to her, he said. It doesn't change the operation. He turned from the window. Here's what we're going to do. The plan took 40 minutes to lay out and another hour to begin executing. The engagement celebration would proceed exactly as scheduled. Every vendor, every staff member, every Guest list item would remain unchanged because any deviation would alert Caleb that the trap had been discovered. Vincent's compromised guards would remain in their positions, going through their normal rotations, completely unaware that Jack had inserted 4 additional people into the rotation at points that covered every exit without being visible to anyone watching from the outside. The disguised attackers in catering and floral vans would be allowed to arrive. They would be tracked from the moment they hit the property line. Jack's team would intercept them quietly before anything happened, using the serviced corridors on the west side that Caleb's intelligence would not have mapped because Vincent had never used them publicly, and Vincent himself would follow the trail to the boathouse. "You're not going in alone," Jack said. It was not a question. "I'm going in appearing to be alone," Vincent said. "There's a difference." "The tunnel," Jack said. The tunnel," Vincent agreed. He held up the brass key. 4 men, through the access point on the north drainage channel. "I need them inside in position before Caleb enters from the other end." Jack looked at him. "And if Caleb doesn't come through the tunnel?" "He'll come through the tunnel," Vincent said, "because the whole point is that he thinks I don't know it exists. He'll use it because it's his advantage. Men like Caleb are always most dangerous when they believe they have the advantage you don't know about." Jack took the key. "Understood." "One more thing," Vincent said. "Rachel Bennett and her daughter, where are they?" "Still in the East Wing. She accepted the room but declined the guard rotation, said she didn't want armed men outside her daughter's door." Vincent absorbed this without expression. "Put someone in the corridor, not outside her door, not visible from her room, but close enough to move in 30 seconds if something changes." "Done. And make sure Mia has breakfast in the morning, the good kind, whatever a 7-year-old considers good." Jack paused for just a fraction of a second, long enough for Vincent to notice, and long enough for Jack to know that Vincent had noticed. "I'll take care of it," he said. When Jack left, Vincent sat alone at his desk for a long time. The folder with Isabella's history was still open in front of him. 3 hospital visits in 2 years under a name she no longer used. Injuries documented with the careful, impersonal language of medical intake forms. A sealed court filing that had taken 11 years and 1 quiet act of forced authority to open. "I thought about Rachel saying that safety should mean having a door you can close, not living behind armed men you cannot refuse." He thought about that for longer than he had expected to. At 2 in the morning, he went upstairs to talk to Isabella. She was sitting on the edge of the bed with her shoes off and her hands in her lap, and the expression of a woman who had been waiting for something inevitable and had gotten tired of waiting and moved through to the other side of dread into a strange, hollow calm. "I know you already ran the records," she said before he spoke. "I know you know about Lake County." "Yes," he said. "And the hospital visits." "Yes." She looked at her hands. "I was going to tell you," she said. "I told myself I was going to tell you, that there was going to be a right moment and I was going to take it. But you didn't." "No," a pause. "I didn't." He sat down in the chair across from her, not close, not beside her, but present, across the table in the way of a man who was not leaving, but was not forgiving either. "Tell me something true," he said. "Not what Caleb told you to say, not what you think gives you the best chance right now, just something true." Isabella looked up at him. Her makeup was gone, and without it she looked younger and harder, at the same time, the way people do when the thing they use to face the world is stripped away, and what remains is something rawer and more real. "I was afraid of him for so long," she said, "that I think I forgot what it felt like not to be afraid. And then I came here and you were—" She stopped. Started again. "I didn't come here with feelings for you. I came here with a plan, and I was going to execute the plan and get my life back." Her voice was steady but barely. "And then months went by, and you were decent to me in ways Caleb never was, in ways my father never was, and I—" She shook her head. "That's not an excuse." "I know it isn't an excuse. I'm not offering it as one." "I know," Vincent said. "He's going to kill me," she said. And the way she said it, not as an accusation, not as a plea, just as a fact that she had arranged in order with other facts, told him that she had arrived at this conclusion on her own and had been sitting with it for some time. "I know that too," he said. She looked at him. "Are you going to let him—" I was quiet for a moment. "No," he said finally, "but not because of what was between us. Because you're a witness and I need you functional, and because I don't let people be killed in my house." She nodded slowly. The answer was not what she had hoped for. He could see that. But he watched her take it and hold it and settle it into herself with the acceptance of a person who has stopped expecting more than what is actually being offered. Your father, he said, he designed this. He gave Caleb the engagement timeline, she said. The guest list, the layout of the boathouse from the 1987 property documents. He told Caleb which guards had been with you the longest and which ones were newer. She paused. He's been involved since the beginning, since before I came here. Why? She looked at the floor. Because Caleb has documentation on him, financial records, political dealings, things that would end him if they became public. My father has been paying that debt in other people's pain for 30 years, and he has never once lost sleep over it. She said this last sentence with a particular precision that told Vincent she had thought it many times before in many different forms and had finally settled on those exact words. He stood up. You're going to stay here until after the engagement dinner, he said. You're going to behave exactly as planned. You're going to walk into that dinner on my arm and smile and let everyone take their photographs. And when the evening is over and Caleb's men have been taken care of, you are going to give a full account to federal investigators of everything you know about Caleb Rourke's network, your father's involvement, the financial records, and every name that belongs to this. Isabella looked at him. And what happens to me after that? That depends on the investigators, he said. Not on me. And you, she said, what do you want to happen to me? He thought about this honestly. I want to stop thinking about you, he said. I want to remember you as something that happened and then ended, and I want to be done with it. He moved to the door. I can't give you more than that. He left her there in the room with the window, and he did not look back. The next 72 hours were the kind of hours that existed outside of normal time, compressed and elastic at once moving fast when they needed to, and stretching into long, tense silences when there was nothing to do but wait. Vincent had lived in hours like these before. He had never enjoyed them. Rachel came to find him the following morning, not the other way around. He was in his office reviewing the intelligence updates when he heard a knock, a real knock, a deliberate knock, not the tentative background noise sound that most people used when they weren't sure they were allowed to interrupt him. He said to come in, and she came in. She was still in the clothes from the night before. She had slept. He could see the desperate edge of exhaustion from last night was gone, but she hadn't had access to her room in the staff quarters to change, and she stood in the doorway in a creased uniform with a bandage on her left hand and her chin level and her expression carrying that quality he had noticed the night before, the specific, careful quality of a person who has decided to do something and is going to do it regardless of how it's received. I need to know what's happening, she said. Not because I'm owed it. I know I'm not owed it. But I remembered something else, and I need to know if it matters, and I need to understand what kind of situation my daughter and I are actually in before I decide what to do. He looked at her for a moment, then gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit down, Mrs. Bennett. She sat. What did you remember? She folded her hands in her lap carefully because of the bandaged one and looked at him directly. The catering trucks, she said. There are 2 that have been coming twice a week for the past 3 weeks. They always come on Tuesdays and Fridays between 11 and 1, which is when I'm usually in the East Wing doing the linen rotation, so I've seen them from the upstairs window. Go on, he said. They park in the service bay on the north side, which is unusual because the kitchen entrance is on the west. I thought it was just inefficiency, but last Tuesday, one of them stayed for 4 hours. Catering trucks don't stay 4 hours for a drop. Vincent looked at Jack, who had been standing in the corner of the room so quietly that Rachel may not have been fully aware of him. Jack made a note. Also, Rachel said the flowers, the floral arrangements for the engagement dinner. I've been helping coordinate the setup schedule because Manuela from the events team was out with her knee. The order confirmation I saw listed 40 arrangements of white lilies, but the venue specification that Isabella approved 3 weeks ago said white roses. She paused. I noticed because I thought it was strange that someone would change the flowers without updating the approval document. I almost mentioned it to Isabella, but she, a small pause. I thought better of it. The air in the room changed. You noticed that on your own, Vincent said. I pay attention to details, she said without any particular pride in it. It's part of the work, he leaned forward. Mrs. Bennett, Rachel, what you've given me in the last 18 hours has been more operationally useful than everything my own intelligence team produced in 3 weeks. I want you to understand that. She looked at him with an expression that was not quite discomfort, but was related to it, the expression of a person who receives direct, genuine acknowledgement, rarely enough that they don't have a smooth response ready for it. I was just paying attention, she said again. I know, he said. That's what I mean. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, is my daughter going to be safe? Yes, he said, and he said it the way he said things when he meant them, absolutely, without the slight upward adjustment in certainty that people use when they are hoping something is true. Rachel looked at him for a long second. Reading him, he thought, checking the architecture of what he just said for weaknesses, for the places where it might give way under pressure. Okay, she said. She said it quietly, and he understood that she was not giving him her trust. She was giving him a provisional loan of it, contingent on the terms being honored. The offer of protection, he said. The secure room, I meant it. I know you meant it, she said. I'm still thinking about what kind of protection actually protects us. You said that last night, he said, about the door you can close. I meant it last night too. He looked at her. What would make it feel like protection instead of confinement? She considered this question as if she hadn't expected it, as if she had expected him to explain why the arrangement he was offering was the correct one and why she should accept it on those terms. The question itself seemed to shift something slightly in the air between them. If Mia can go to school, she said, if she doesn't have to explain to her teacher why she didn't come in, if we have a way to reach someone other than your people if something goes wrong. If I'm not locked in, she stopped. That's what it would feel like. I thought about this practically. The school is manageable. I can put someone nearby without it being visible to Mia. The rest, he paused. I can give you a direct line to someone outside my organization. Someone with authority. If you need to use it, you use it. She looked at him steadily. Why would you do that? Because you asked me to, he said. And because you're right that protection without choice is a different kind of trap. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the specific silence of two people who have said something true to each other and are letting it settle. Rachel stood up. Thank you, she said. She moved to the door and then stopped with her hand on the frame. The engagement dinner, she said. It's still happening. Yes, he said. And you're going to let whatever they're planning play out. I'm going to let it begin, he said. It won't finish the way they plan. She nodded slowly. He watched her working through the implications of this, the same way she had worked through the implication of the Lily order, the catering trucks, the key, all of it. The careful, systematic logic of a person who processes information completely before acting on it. Be careful, she said. It came out plainly without ceremony, and it sounded exactly like what it was, a genuine thing said by someone who had no particular reason to say it, except that it was true. He looked at her. I will be. She left. He sat with the silence she left behind for longer than he was used to sitting with silences. There was something in the air of the room that was different from before she had walked in, and it took him a full minute to identify what it was. She had spoken to him without fear. Not without caution. She had been careful, measured, deliberate. But fear was something different from caution, and she had not brought any into his office. She had come in, said what she needed to say, asked what she needed to ask, and left with her dignity exactly where she had brought it. In his world, that was rarer than intelligence, rarer than loyalty, rarer than almost anything he could think of. Jack appeared in the doorway. The Northside catering trucks, he said. We just confirmed 3 of the drivers have been working under false IDs for the past 5 weeks. 2 of them have prior connection to Rourke's distribution network. They've been mapping the property. How much of it? Vincent said. Enough, Jack had said. The West Corridor, the garden-level entrances, the staff parking structure. He paused. Not the tunnel. Because Caleb thinks the tunnel is his alone, Vincent said. Right. Good. Vincent picked up the brass key again, turned it once in his fingers, set it down. That means everything goes as planned. He looked at the empty doorway where Rachel had been standing 2 minutes ago. Jack, he said, yes. The direct outside line I mentioned to Mrs. Bennett, set it up through the federal contact, not through anyone on our payroll. Jack looked at him for a moment. That's a significant access point to give a staff member. She's not a staff member anymore, Vincent said. She resigned this morning without saying so. I could tell. He stood up. Set it up. Jack set it up. 2 days later, the intelligence picture was complete, and it was worse than the first picture which was always how it went. The more you looked, the more there was to find. Recovered communications from Isabella's secondary device, the one she had been using for calls she believed were off-network, showed the full scope of Caleb's plan. I was not coming alone. He had 8 men positioned across the property in roles that had been established weeks in advance. 2 on the catering team, 1 in the floral delivery crew, 3, who had taken positions as contracted maintenance workers on the estate's grounds over the past month, and 2 who would arrive the night of the engagement dinner as additional security personnel hired through a third-party firm that Vincent's team had not independently verified because Isabella had handled that specific contract herself. The boathouse was equipped, not just with the tunnel and the legal transfer documents. There was a second team positioned outside on the north shoreline, accessible from the water, in case the tunnel approach was compromised. Caleb had built redundancy into the plan. He was thorough in the way that a man who has failed once and survived it becomes thorough, not leaving corners, dark covering the exits, planning for the contingency that someone might know what he was doing. But he had not planned for Rachel Bennett. He had not planned for a woman who delivered tea and paid attention and picked up a small brass key from a floor and kept it without knowing why. He had not planned for a 7-year-old child who ran in the right direction in the right moment. He had not planned for the specific texture of what happens when the people you treat as invisible decide to see everything. And he had not planned for the fact that Vincent Caruso, for the first time in 20 years, had listened to someone without a weapon and without a title and without anything except the truth and a bandaged hand and a request to please keep her daughter in school. The engagement dinner was 4 days away. Vincent spent those 4 days in the controlled and deliberate work of a man who has calculated every variable and is waiting for the moment to apply the result. He reviewed the tactical plan with Jack every morning. He sat with the intelligence updates every evening. He ate at the correct times and slept for the correct number of hours because the plan required him to be sharp, and he did not allow himself to think about anything except the plan. Except that sometimes in the hours between the intelligence review and sleep, he found himself thinking about a drawing on a notepad, a small figure in a kitchen at a table rendered in the uncertain but earnest lines of a 7-year-old who drew what she saw without any performance or artifice. He had not looked at it. He did not need to look at it. He had the image of it in his mind from the brief moment he had seen it over Mia's shoulder in the kitchen, and it stayed there the way certain things stay, not because they are comfortable, but because they are true. In the picture, as best he could tell from that brief glance, was a kitchen table, a small girl with braided hair, a woman standing nearby, and a man across the table from them both. I didn't know what expression Mia had given him in the drawing. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. He went back to the tactical plan. 4 days. The night of the engagement dinner arrived the way all inevitable things arrive, quietly without announcement, slipping in through the ordinary passage of hours, until suddenly it was there. And there was no more time for anything except what had already been decided. Vincent dressed alone. He had always dressed alone. It was one of the few rituals of his private life that he had never allowed to become a performance. He put on the dark jacket, the correct tie, the shoes that had been polished to a standard that would have satisfied a military inspection. He stood in front of the mirror for exactly as long as it took to confirm that everything was in order, and then he turned away from it. At 6:45 p.m., he walked downstairs. Isabella was waiting in the entrance hall. She was wearing the dress they had selected together 3 weeks ago, deep green with a single shoulder, and her hair was done, and her jewelry was correct, and she looked exactly like the woman he had been planning to celebrate tonight. The performance was flawless. It would have fooled anyone who had not spent the past 4 days reading her communications and watching the way she held her hands when she thought no one was paying attention. She looked at him when he came down the stairs. He looked back at her. "Ready," he said. "Yes," she said. They walked into the dining room together. There were 60 people at that dinner. Business contacts, political connections, a handful of old family friends who had watched Vincent grow from a young man inheriting a difficult legacy into whatever he had become. They were served 4 courses and 2 wines and a dessert that the chef had been working on for a week. Conversation moved around the table in the easy, slightly elevated way of people who know they are at an important event and are performing their best version of casual. Vincent moved through all of it with the precision of a man who had grown up doing exactly this, occupying a room, calibrating every interaction, giving each person exactly enough attention to satisfy them without ever losing track of the larger picture. He shook hands and made eye contact and said the correct things, and not once in 2 hours did his attention wander from the feed in his earpiece, where Jack was providing live updates from every position on the property. 8:43 p.m. The two catering infiltrators had entered the West Service Corridor. Jack's team was tracking them. 8:51 p.m. A third figure identified as one of Caleb's men from the maintenance team had broken off from the legitimate crew and was moving toward the north grounds. 8:57 p.m. Two vans in the service bay that had not been there an hour ago. Vincent set down his dessert fork and placed his napkin beside his plate and looked at Isabella across the table. She was talking to the woman on her left, smiling, her hand resting beside her wine glass with complete steadiness. She had not touched the wine all evening. Their eyes met. He gave the smallest possible nod. Something moved across her face, not relief, not exactly. Something more complicated. The expression of a person who has been holding a breath for a very long time and has finally been told they are allowed to exhale. He stood, excused himself with the warmth of a host who has a brief matter to attend to, and walked out of the dining room. In the corridor outside, Jack was waiting. "All 8 of Rourke's men are on property," Jack said quietly, falling into step. 3 in the catering bay, 2 on the grounds, 2 in the security rotation we identified. And 1, he paused. 1 came in through the water, north shoreline. We tracked him from the dock. "The backup team," Vincent said. "Yes, he's positioned outside the boathouse on the exterior. Caleb's contingency." "Where is Caleb?" Jack checked his device. "Not yet on our tracking, which means he's using the tunnel." Vincent held out his hand. Jack placed the brass key in it. "My 4 men," Vincent said, "in position inside the tunnel from the drainage access. They've been there for 40 minutes. Caleb won't know they're there until it's too late to matter. The other teams, ready on my signal. The moment you're inside the boathouse and Caleb is committed to the room, we take everyone simultaneously. No gunfire if we can help it. Clean." Vincent pocketed the key, and the exterior man on the shoreline. "Already handled," Jack said. "He's sitting zip-tied behind the equipment shed thinking about his choices." Vincent almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "Good," he said. "Give me 12 minutes to reach the boathouse. Then you move to Fouts." Jack caught his arm before he turned. It was the first time in 11 years of working together that Jack had physically stopped him from moving. Vincent looked at the hand on his arm, then at Jack's face. "If Caleb is armed in there," Jack said, "which he will be." "He'll be armed," Vincent said. "Then let me—" "No," Vincent said. "This one is mine." He looked at Jack steadily. "He's had his hand in my house 4 months. He put a 7-year-old girl in danger. He was going to kill a woman who never did anything to him except exist in a room where she wasn't supposed to." He removed Jack's hand from his arm without aggression, just firmly. "This one is mine." Jack let go. Vincent walked toward the north grounds. The night was cold and clear. He moved quickly through the dark, taking the path he had walked 100 times in daylight, knowing the terrain well enough to navigate it without light, and doing so now without a flashlight. Because light was information, and he was not yet ready to give Caleb any information at all. The boathouse appeared ahead. It had been closed for 11 years. The structure was sound, his people had verified that, but it had the particular stillness of a building that hasn't been inhabited, a quiet that was different from the quiet of an empty room. The weathered wood, and the closed shutters, in the absence of any visible light, should have made it look like nothing. But there was a thin line of light under the interior door. Caleb was already inside. Vincent stood outside for 4 seconds. He was not afraid. He had learned years ago that fear and danger were not the same thing, and that the moment you allowed fear to become the lens through which you saw danger, you started making decisions on fear's terms instead of your own. He was not afraid. He was precise. He was present. He was in the specific technical sense of the word ready. He opened the door and walked in. Caleb Rourke looked up from the table. I was older than the last photograph Vincent's team had sourced. There was more gray in his hair, and his face had the particular texture of a man who has spent years doing things that accumulate. He was wearing a dark coat, and he had a glass of whiskey in his hand that he had apparently poured from a bottle he'd brought himself, which Vincent found absurd and almost impressive in its audacity. He had set up at the old desk in the corner of the boathouse office, a solid wood thing that had been there since Vincent's grandfather's time, and on the desk were 2 documents: transfer agreements, shipping routes, account numbers, a pen. He had brought his own pen. Vincent, Caleb said. He said it with the specific warmth of a man performing comfort. I was starting to wonder. Caleb, Vincent said. He walked to the center of the room and stopped there. He did not sit. He did not move toward the desk. He stood in the middle of the room with his hands in his jacket pockets and his posture completely relaxed and looked at the man who had been building this moment for months. Caleb studied him. Something shifted slightly behind his eyes, the first flicker of recalibration. He had expected something from Vincent's entrance, and whatever he had expected, this was not it. You don't seem surprised to be here, Caleb said. I'm not, Vincent said. A pause. Caleb set down the whiskey glass. Isabella told you. Isabella told me some of it, Vincent said. Your communications told me the rest. The recalibration behind Caleb's eyes accelerated, moving through options quickly. Vincent could see the calculation happening in real time, not panic, because Caleb was not a man who panicked, but the rapid professional assessment of a situation that has changed shape. He would be thinking about his 8 men. He would be thinking about the tunnel. My men, Caleb started, are being detained right now, Vincent said. All 8 of them, including the one you sent through the water, he paused. The zip ties are rated for 300 pounds. Your man on the shoreline, it is around 220, so he should be comfortable. Caleb was very still. The tunnel, he said. My men have been in the tunnel for 40 minutes, Vincent said. They're positioned at your end. You can't go back the way you came. He watched this land, watched Caleb do the full calculation, and arrive at the correct conclusion, which was that the room was already over, and the only remaining question was what form the ending took. You're going to kill me, Caleb said. Not a question, the tone of a man arranging facts. No, Vincent said. Caleb looked at him. If I kill you, Vincent said, everything you know goes with you, the accounts, the political contacts, the network you've been building inside legitimate systems for 30 years. He moved a half step closer, the trafficking operation connected to Isabella's father. He watched Caleb's jaw tighten at that. I know about that too. You have no proof of... I have 47 days of your communications, Vincent said. Reconstructed, sourced, ready to hand to federal investigators tomorrow morning if I choose. He paused. Whether they receive them tomorrow morning or next week depends entirely on how cooperative you decide to be tonight. The silence that followed was the longest of the evening. Caleb sat very still at the desk with the transfer documents in front of him and the pen he had brought himself, and Vincent stood in the center of the room and did not move, and somewhere beneath the floor the tunnel ran dark and quiet with 4 of Vincent's men waiting at its far end, and outside 8 more of Caleb's men were sitting in the custody of Jack's team. And the whole elaborate construction of months of planning was balanced in this room on the decision a man made when he finally understood that he had run out of moves. You could have just had me arrested, Caleb said. You didn't need the theater. I needed you to understand something, Vincent said. I needed you to understand that the people you thought were invisible, the woman who cleans the rooms, the child in the kitchen, the staff member who delivers tea and happens to be paying attention, those are the people who ended you. Not my security team, not my intelligence operation, a housekeeper who picked up a key off the floor. Something crossed Caleb's face. It was not shame, he was too far from shame for that. But it was the specific expression of a man confronting a fact that has genuinely surprised him, and that the surprise itself was humiliating. Her, he said. Her, Vincent confirmed. She's a nobody, Caleb said. And the contempt in his voice was so automatic, so reflexive that it came out before he could decide whether it was tactically wise. She's a housekeeper. She carries tea. She also carries more courage than anyone else in this operation, Vincent said. Including me, he said it matter-of-factly without sentimentality. She refused to let my protection become her confinement. She told the truth when she had every reason to stay quiet. She picked up a key she didn't understand and kept it because something told her it mattered. He looked at Caleb steadily. That's the person who undid everything you spent 9 months building. Caleb had nothing to say to this. The documents on that table, Vincent said, nodding at the transfer agreements. You can keep them. You're not getting my signature tonight or any other night. He reached into his jacket. Caleb went rigid, his hand moving toward his coat. Vincent pulled out his phone and held it up clearly. I'm calling my contact, he said, and you're going to sit there. He made the call. The federal contact answered on the first ring. They had been on standby for 2 days. Vincent said 3 words, we have him. Then he put the phone away. Caleb looked at the door, then at the floor where the tunnel entrance was, then at Vincent. The calculation was visible on his face, the last inventory of options that all led to the same place. Isabella, he said, she'll tell them everything. She already has, Vincent said. Her father is going to be arrested by 9 a.m., Vincent said. We sourced the financial documentation 2 days ago. Caleb exhaled. It was a long, controlled breath, the breath of a man who is reorganizing himself around an outcome he cannot change. You're not going to execute me, he said. It was almost wondering. No, Vincent said. Why not? Vincent thought about this honestly. He thought about what Rachel had said about safety and about doors and about protection that was only another form of control. He thought about the way she had come into his office and said what she needed to say and left with her dignity exactly where she had brought it. He thought about the things she had said about his world, that she was still afraid of it, and that fear was real, and that she was choosing to move through it anyway. I thought about what kind of man a person like that deserved to have around her daughter. Because the world doesn't get better if I kill everyone in it who's done something wrong, he said. And because the people who need you to testify deserve a living witness more than I need the satisfaction. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. You've changed, he said. Working on it, Vincent said. The federal team arrived in 11 minutes. They came through the main property entrance and through the tunnel simultaneously, and the coordination was clean enough that Vincent found himself noting it with professional appreciation, even in the middle of everything else. Caleb was taken out without incident. He did not resist. Men like Caleb Vincent knew only resisted when they still had something to gain from resistance. When the calculation was final, they went quietly. Vincent stood in the boathouse after everyone had cleared out. He stood there for a few minutes alone in the place that had been designed as a trap in the building his grandfather had built in 1964, and that had sat closed for 11 years, and that someone had planned to use to end his life. He stood in it and breathed the cold air that came through the gaps in the old wood and thought about none of the things he expected to think about. He thought about white roses on a corridor floor. I thought about a 7-year-old who had run toward the most dangerous man in the building because her mother told her to run and find someone. He went back to the house. Isabella was still in the dining room when he returned. The guests had been told that Vincent had a brief urgent matter and would return momentarily, and the dinner had continued because that was what people did at events. They continued because the alternative was confronting the fact that something had gone wrong, and people at engagement dinners were not prepared to do that. He came back through the side entrance and crossed to where Isabella sat and placed one hand briefly on the back of her chair and leaned down. It's done, he said quietly for her alone. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them and picked up her wine glass, the one she had not touched all evening, and took a slow, deliberate sip. He straightened and rejoined the dinner and said something charming to the couple on his left, and the evening continued for another 40 minutes before the guests began to leave. And not a single person in the room had any idea that while they were eating dessert, a man who had planned to kill the host had been handed to federal agents in a building at the north end of the property. That was the power of invisible work. The world ran on it, and most people never looked at it directly. At 10:15 p.m., when the last car had left the drive, Jack appeared at Vincent's side. Clean, he said. All 8 of Caleb's men processed and transferred. Federal team has the documentation. Caleb is in custody. Isabella's father. Federal team is at his house now. Vincent nodded. He was tired in the specific way of a man who has been precisely focused for 4 days and has just allowed the focus to release. Not exhausted, just suddenly, genuinely tired. Mrs. Bennett, he said, is she still in the East Wing? Yes, Jack said. She waited up. I don't know how she knew anything had happened, but she's been in the sitting room off the East Corridor for 2 hours. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Is Mia asleep? Since 9:30, Jack said. She made Marco read to her until she fell asleep. Tell me Marco read to her. Marco read to her, Jack confirmed. He chose something about a rabbit. He was apparently quite committed to the performance. Vincent looked at him. His words, Jack said. Vincent walked to the East Wing. Rachel was sitting in the corridor, sitting room in the chair by the window. She was not reading, and she was not on her phone. She was just sitting with her hands in her lap in the way that he had come to understand was how she sat when she was thinking. Not waiting passively, but processing actively, working through whatever she was working through with the same quiet thoroughness she applied to everything. She looked up when he came in. He sat down in the chair across from her. Between them was a small table with a teapot that had gone cold and two cups, one of which she had used and one of which he understood she had put there for him. "It's over," he said, held his gaze. "Caleb, in federal custody, all his people. The documentation is with investigators." He paused. "Isabella's father is being arrested tonight." She let out a slow breath. "Isabella. She cooperated. She'll face consequences, but the investigators have her statement." He looked at her. "She told the truth in the end." "People do sometimes," Rachel said, "when they run out of reasons not to." He reached forward and poured himself a tea from the cold pot. He didn't care that it was cold. It was something to do with his hands. "You're all right," he said, meaning Mia, meaning Rachel, meaning both of them. "We're all right," she said. She looked at the cold tea in his cup and something moved across her face that was close to the beginning of a smile but didn't fully arrive. "There's a kettle in the kitchen," she said. "I can make more." "This is fine," he said. They sat with the cold tea in the quiet of the house after a long and complicated night, and outside of the East Wing window, Chicago was exactly what it always was, large and indifferent and full of people going about their own lives, knowing nothing about what had just resolved itself in a locked boathouse at the north end of a property they would never visit. "She threatened me," Rachel said, not with anger, just placing the fact in the room where it belonged. "Isabella, she told me she would make both of us disappear." "I know," Vincent said. "I need you to understand that it wasn't just fear," Rachel said. "When Mia ran, it wasn't just because I was afraid. I told her to run because she is 7 years old and she had already heard too much and I needed her out of that room." She looked at him directly. "I didn't know she would run into you. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just needed her not to be there." "She ran exactly the right direction," Vincent said. "She did," Rachel said. And this time the expression that crossed her face was something fuller and more complicated. Pride and relief and the specific tenderness of a parent who has watched their child do something that revealed who they are and has discovered that who they are is someone worth knowing. Vincent looked at the cold tea. "She's going to be all right," he said. "Both of you are going to be all right. I will make sure of that." Rachel looked at him for a long moment. "You said that before," she said, "and you meant it." "I still mean it," he said. "I know," she said. "That's the thing." He left the East Wing at close to midnight. The house had settled around him into its normal nighttime quiet, and somewhere in it, a 7-year-old was sleeping through all of it, warm and safe, having spent the evening with a man who read to her about a rabbit. He went to his office. On the desk, next to the now empty spot where the brass key had been, was a folded piece of paper. He picked it up. It was a drawing, done in crayon, the lines uncertain and earnest and completely sincere. A small house, a woman and a child inside it, a tall figure standing outside the door. The figure was drawn with particular care, a dark jacket correctly proportioned, hands, a face rendered in the serious literal way of children who draw what they mean. He was outside the door. In the drawing his hand was raised, knocking. He sat down at his desk and held the drawing and looked at it for a long time. And for the first time in 4 very long and very specific days, he did not think about the plan. I thought about doors, about the difference between entering and being invited, about a child who had looked at a man who frightened the entire city of Chicago and had drawn him as someone who knocked and waited. He set the drawing carefully at the center of his desk. He had spent his whole life walking through any door he wanted. He had never once stood on the other side and considered the possibility that waiting might be the more honest thing. The night was quiet. He was still thinking when the first light came through the window. The morning after Caleb's arrest, Vincent was at his desk by 6 a.m. when his phone rang with a number he did not recognize. He answered it on the second ring, the way he answered everything, without hesitation, because hesitation gave the other person information about your uncertainty. It was a journalist, not a legitimate one. The kind that worked adjacent to legitimate, the kind who received information from interested parties and packaged it for outlets that asked the minimum number of questions about provenance. The man introduced himself by a name that Vincent's team would later confirm was real, and then he said something that made Vincent set down his coffee cup very carefully on the desk. "Mr. Caruso," the journalist said, I've been given documentation suggesting that Rachel Bennett, a former member of your household staff, conspired with her daughter to gain access to your property and financial records. My source described Mrs. Bennett as a sophisticated manipulator who used her child as a prop to gain your sympathy. I wanted to give you the opportunity to comment before we publish. Vincent was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Where did that documentation come from? He said. My source prefers to remain the Whitmore family, Vincent said. Not a question. A brief pause that was itself an answer. I'm not in a position to print whatever you were paid to print, Vincent said. We'll talk again afterward. He hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he called Jack. The Whitmore family, he said when Jack picked up. Isabella's side. Not the father, he's in custody. The cousins, the family publicist, whoever is still operational. They've decided to retaliate, and they're doing it through Rachel Bennett. Hal, Jack said. They're going to run the story. Rachel as a con artist, Mia as a prop. The narrative is that she manipulated her way into the estate to access my finances. He paused. They're going to paint a housekeeper with a 7-year-old daughter as the criminal because she's the easiest target and the least able to defend herself. What do you want to do? Jack said. What Vincent wanted to do was immediate, concrete, and would have resolved the situation within 48 hours in a way that the Whitmore family's publicist would not forget for the rest of his professional life. He had the capacity for that. He had the resources. He had, if he was being completely honest, the instinct. When something threatened his people, he neutralized the threat. That was what he did. That was what he had always done. I thought about Rachel saying she needed protection to feel like protection and not confinement. He thought about her saying she wanted her name restored by truth and not by power. He put the instinct back in its drawer and closed it. Nothing yet, he said. I need to talk to her first. I went to the East Wing at 7:15. Rachel was awake. He had understood that she would be the same way he had come to understand a handful of other things about her without being told. She answered the door in her own clothes, not the uniform, and this small detail landed somewhere in him as a marker of how much had changed in 72 hours. She was not his employee anymore. She had stopped being his employee the moment she had walked into his office and told him what she had remembered about the catering trucks. There's something I need to tell you, he said, and I need you to hear it before you read it somewhere else. She opened the door wider and let him in. Mia was still asleep in the adjoining room. He could hear the small, even sound of a sleeping child through the partially open door, and it made the conversation feel both more urgent and more necessary. He told Rachel everything. The journalist's call, the Whitmore family's apparent decision to control the narrative by destroying hers, the story they were preparing to publish. He said it plainly and completely, the way he said things when he had decided that the person he was talking to deserved the full truth without management. Rachel listened without interrupting. Her hands were in her lap and her face was still in that particular way of hers, processing everything completely before responding. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? She said. I want to know what you want to do, he said. She looked at him. That's not how this usually works, she said. In your world. No, he agreed, it isn't. She stood up and walked to the window and stood with her back to him, for a moment looking at something he couldn't see, working through something internal. He waited. If you go after them, she said, still at the window, you might stop the story. You might discredit the source. You might make the journalist back down because people back down from you. She turned. And then what the story that saves my reputation is that the Mafia boss silenced the people who were lying about me. She shook her head. I'm still the woman in the middle of Vincent Caruso's world. I'm still the story. Yes, he said. I want a hearing, she said. A real one. Formal. With the people who are behind this sitting across a table from me while I say what actually happened. She said this with a steadiness that he recognized as a specific kind of courage. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to move through it and speak anyway. I want them to look at Mia and say it to her face, that she's a prop, that I used her. Her voice was completely level. I want to know if they can actually say that when she's in the room. Vincent looked at her for a long moment. That will be harder, he said. On you, on Mia. I know, she said, but it'll be real, and real lasts. She met his eyes. Can you arrange it without arranging the outcome? He understood what she was asking. She was not asking him to fix it. She was asking him to create the conditions in which she could fix it herself. Yes, he said, then that's what I want. The hearing was arranged for 4 days later. Vincent's legal team coordinated with a neutral mediator, someone with enough standing to carry weight far enough outside his direct influence to be credible. The Whitmore family, operating through their attorney and their publicist, agreed to attend. They agreed because declining would have looked like admission. They were also, Vincent suspected, operating under the reasonable assumption that a housekeeper facing a room full of lawyers in influential contacts would fold. They did not know Rachel Bennett. The 3 days between the confrontation in Isabella's suite and the hearing were the strangest 3 days Vincent could remember. The operation was over. Caleb was in federal custody. The immediate danger had resolved. And yet the estate felt more unsettled in its aftermath than it had during the planning, because danger is clarifying and resolution leaves a particular kind of silence that is harder to navigate. Rachel and Mia stayed in the East Wing because Rachel had decided it was safer while the Whitmore situation was still active, and Vincent found himself rearranging his schedule around the fact of their presence in a way he didn't fully examine. He ate breakfast at the house now instead of in his car on the way to his first meeting. He had not eaten breakfast at the house in 7 years. He told himself this was practical. On the second day, Mia appeared in his office doorway at 9 in the morning. He was on a call. She stood in the doorway very politely, not making a sound, waiting with the specific patience of a child who has been taught to wait rather than interrupt. He finished the call and looked at her. "Can I come in?" she said. "Yes," he said. She came in and stood on the other side of his desk with her hands clasped behind her back, looking at the surface of the desk with the expression of someone conducting an inspection. She saw the drawing, the one she had made in the kitchen, the one he had placed at the center of his desk, and her expression shifted to something he couldn't fully read. "You kept it?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Why?" "I thought about lying. Not a harmful lie, just the kind of comfortable deflection that adults use with children when the true answer feels too large." He decided against it. "Because it showed me something I hadn't thought about before," he said. Mia looked at him. "You're standing outside," she said, referring to the drawing with the directness of a child pointing out an obvious fact. "I know," he said. "That's because you didn't live there yet," she said. "In the drawing, you were visiting." She said this as though it explained everything, which in its own way it did. She looked at him again with that particular solemnity. "Do you want to live somewhere?" He sat with this question for a moment. A 7-year-old had just asked him something that no one in his adult life had thought to ask. "I'm working on figuring that out," he said. Mia nodded as though this was a satisfactory answer. "Okay," she said. Then she turned and walked out of his office, and he heard her footsteps going back down the corridor, and he sat alone with the drawing and that question. "Do you want to live somewhere?" The hearing took place on a Thursday morning in a conference room at a law firm on Michigan Avenue chosen for its neutrality. Vincent arrived with Rachel. He had offered her a driver and a full legal team, and she had accepted the driver and one attorney, his best one, a woman named Clara, who was also the only person in his legal department who had ever made him feel that he was being evaluated rather than simply represented. Rachel wore her own clothes, dark blue, clean lines, appropriate and quiet and entirely hers. She had Mia's hand. Mia was wearing a dress that Rachel had pressed that morning with a travel iron she had asked for without explanation and received without question. The Whitmore attorney arrived with 2 colleagues and the family publicist, and 2 people Vincent identified as character witnesses, former staff members from Isabella's household who had been coached on what they were there to say. He recognized the architecture of the approach immediately. It was a pressure play. Multiply the voices, overwhelm the single credible source, create the impression of a consensus even when the consensus was manufactured. He had used this approach himself twice. He was not proud of it. The mediator opened the session. He stated the purpose to evaluate the credibility of public claims made against Rachel Bennett and to determine whether those claims had evidentiary basis or constituted defamation. The Whitmore attorney spoke first. He was smooth practiced and very good at the thing he was doing, which was constructing a story from adjacent facts that were individually true but collectively misleading. Rachel had entered the state under routine employment. She had gained access to private family information. She had used her daughter's presence to emotionally influence a powerful man. The attorney did not say these things crudely. He arranged them in a narrative arc that had its own internal logic And he delivered it with the confidence of someone who had delivered versions of this narrative many times before. Vincent watched Rachel during all of it. She was still. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her, and her face was composed, and she was listening to every word with the same careful attention she brought to everything. When the attorney finished, the mediator looked at Rachel. She began at the beginning. She described the afternoon in Isabella's suite with a precision that was devastating in its specificity, not because she was dramatic, but because she was exact. The time she had knocked, the door that was already open, the conversation she had heard, the specific words, the broken pitcher, the water soaking through her uniform, her daughter's voice in the corridor after she had told her to run. She spoke for 11 minutes without notes. The Whitmore attorney interrupted twice. Both times she waited for him to finish without agitation and then continued from exactly where she had been. Then the attorney made the mistake. He said, "Mrs. Bennett, isn't it possible that you coached your daughter to perform distress in order to attract Mr. Caruso's attention? Isn't it possible that the child's behavior was calculated rather than genuine?" The room went quiet. Rachel looked at him. She looked at him for 3 full seconds without speaking, and in those 3 seconds, something changed in the room, a shift in weight, a redistribution of something invisible but felt. Then she turned to Mia, who was sitting beside her, and she said quietly and directly, "Mia, this man thinks you were pretending to be scared that night. Can you look at him?" Mia turned and looked at the Whitmore attorney. 7 years old, dark braided hair, eyes that were completely clear and completely unafraid because she was looking at someone she had already assessed and found to be less frightening than the thing she had actually been frightened of. The attorney looked back at her. "Tell him what you remember about that night," Rachel said. "Whatever you want to say." Mia said, "I was scared because the lady said she was going to make us disappear, and I didn't want to disappear, so I ran to find someone because my mama said to find someone." She paused. "I wasn't pretending. Pretending isn't the same as being scared. I know the difference." The Whitmore attorney opened his mouth. He closed it again. He looked at the child for 2 full seconds, and whatever mechanism he used to say things in rooms like this, the professional distance, the practiced language, the carefully constructed narrative was not operational in this moment. He could not repeat the accusation, not with Mia looking at him, not with the room watching him decide whether to repeat it. He did not repeat it. Vincent, who had been sitting 2 seats from Rachel and had not spoken once during the session because she had asked him not to felt something settle in his chest. Not triumph, something quieter and more durable than triumph. The specific satisfaction of watching someone do something hard in the right way. The mediator called a brief recess. During the recess, the door at the back of the room opened and Isabella walked in. She was not supposed to be there. She was cooperating with federal investigators under conditions that technically permitted her movement, but made a public appearance like this complicated and inadvisable. She had come anyway. She looked worse than she had at the engagement dinner. Not physically. Physically, she was composed, correct, controlled. But the expression on her face was different from any expression Vincent had seen her wear before. It was the expression of someone who has set down something very heavy and is still feeling the absence of the weight. She walked to the front of the room. "I need to speak," she said to the mediator. The Whitmore attorney stood up. "Miss Whitmore, this is highly irregular, and your counsel—" "Sit down," Isabella said. She said it with the specific authority of someone who has nothing left to lose and has discovered in that condition a kind of freedom. He sat down. Isabella looked at the mediator. "I want to make a statement on the record," she said. "I was present during the incident in question. I was the person who threatened Rachel Bennett and her daughter. I made the threat. I broke the pitcher. I told her that I would make them disappear. And I used those exact words deliberately because I wanted her to be afraid." She paused. She had heard me on the phone with my husband. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was carrying tea. The room was absolutely still. "Rachel Bennett did not steal anything from my suite," Isabella continued. "She did not conspire with her daughter. She did not manipulate anyone. She carried tea. She heard something she wasn't supposed to hear, and I threatened a woman and a child because I was afraid of what they knew." She looked directly at Rachel for the first time. "I'm sorry, I know that's inadequate. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I needed to say it in a room where it's on record, because you deserve the truth said publicly in the same kind of room where the lies were going to be said publicly." Rachel looked at Isabella for a long moment. Her expression was not forgiving, and it was not cold. It was the expression of someone receiving something real and deciding what to do with it. Thank you, Rachel said. It was 2 words, and it was entirely genuine, and it was not absolution. It was exactly what it sounded like, acknowledgement of something true being said, and nothing more than that. Isabella nodded. Then she turned and walked back out of the room. The hearing concluded 40 minutes later. The mediator's finding was unambiguous, no credible basis for the claims against Rachel Bennett. The Whitmore publicist left without speaking to anyone. The attorney gathered his papers with the carefully neutral expression of a professional who has lost a session and is already thinking about the next one. Clara Vincent's attorney caught Rachel's arm as they were leaving. That was remarkable, she said, and Clara was not a woman who used that word carelessly. I just told the truth, Rachel said. Yes, Clara said, that's what was remarkable. In the car going back to the estate, Rachel sat beside Mia and held her daughter's hand and looked out the window and said nothing for 5 minutes. Vincent sat across from them and did the same. Then Rachel said, without turning from the window, "We're going to move out." He had expected this. He had been expecting it since the night in the boathouse when he had sat across from her over cold tea and understood clearly and finally what kind of woman she was. "I know," he said. "We need our own place," she said. "Mia needs her own school, and I need to go back to work, and we need our own—" She paused, searching for the word. "Our own version of normal, whatever that looks like now." "What can I do?" he said. She turned and looked at him. "The protection," she said. "Discreet. Something Mia doesn't see and doesn't know about. Just for a while until—" She stopped. "Just for a while." "Done," he said. "Not your people parked outside the building," she said. "Something that doesn't make the neighbors wonder." "Done," he said again. She looked at him steadily. "That's all I'm asking for." He nodded. She turned back to the window. Mia leaned against her mother's arm and closed her eyes and was asleep in 4 minutes, which was the particular superpower of children who have been through too much and trust the person beside them completely. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Vincent's recent life, which was saying something given the competition. He transferred what remained of Caleb's case documentation to federal investigators on a rolling basis anonymously through channels that could not be traced back to him directly, but that any competent investigator would eventually quietly understand the origin of. He did this without announcement or expectation of credit, because the point was not credit. The point was that the network Caleb had built, the trafficking connections, the political corruption, the financial crimes that had made men like Isabella's father untouchable for 30 years, needed to be exposed by people with the legal authority to expose it. And the fastest way to give them that authority was to give them the evidence. He also began a separate process that he had not told anyone about. Not Jack, not Clara, not the federal contact. He started making calls to the people on the most violent side of his organization, to the contractors who handled the parts of his business that had never been close to legitimate. He told them one conversation at a time that those arrangements were changing. Some of them accepted this. Some of them pushed back. The ones who pushed back were given a choice that Vincent stated clearly and without emotion, and all of them eventually made the choice he expected. He was still Vincent Caruso. The choice was not difficult to make. I was not dismantling everything overnight. He understood himself well enough to know that transformation was not an event. It was a series of decisions made consistently over a very long time. He also understood that understanding this did not make it easy. Some mornings he woke up and the instincts of 20 years pushed against the decisions of the past few weeks with a force that was physical. On those mornings, he thought about a drawing on a notepad, a man outside a door, hand raised waiting. I thought about what it meant that a child had imagined him that way. He had spent his whole life believing that power meant entry, that if you were strong enough and certain enough and feared enough, every door opened for you. He had walked through every door that way and called it living. Mia had drawn him outside, not because she was afraid of him. He understood that now, looking back at the picture he kept centered on his desk. She had drawn him outside because in her understanding of the world, outside was where you started. Outside was where you stood before you were invited. And being invited was different from simply entering, in the same way that being trusted was different from being obeyed. He visited Rachel's apartment for the first time 6 weeks after she moved out of the estate. He came alone without a driver, without Jack, without anything except a rolled-up piece of paper that he had spent 3 days working up to bringing. He knocked on the door, he stood in the corridor and waited. He heard footsteps, small fast footsteps, and then Mia's voice on the other side of the door saying, "Mama, it's the man." And Rachel's voice saying, "I know I heard the knock." And then the sound of the lock turning. Rachel opened the door. She looked at him. He looked at her. Between them was the ordinary threshold of an ordinary apartment door, and on one side of it was a woman building a life on her own terms, and on the other side was a man who was slowly and imperfectly and very deliberately trying to become the kind of person worth building a life alongside. "Hi," she said. "I brought something," he said. He held out the rolled paper. She took it and unrolled it. It was Mia's drawing, the one from the kitchen. The crayon figures the small house, the man outside the door. He had had it mounted and framed, and then, at the last minute, taken it out of the frame because it had seemed like too much. Too large a gesture for a first visit to an apartment he had not yet been invited into. Rachel looked at the drawing for a moment, then she looked at him. "She'll want to know you brought it back," she said. "I know," he said. "I thought she should have it." Rachel held the door open a little wider. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." He stepped through the door. He did not take anything for granted. He sat where he was shown, and he drank the tea when it was made, and he listened more than he spoke. And when Mia showed him what she was currently drawing, a new picture, a more complicated one, with more figures and more rooms, he looked at it carefully and asked what was happening in it without projecting an answer. He stayed for 1 hour. When he stood to leave, Rachel walked him to the door, and at the threshold he turned back. "Thank you," he said, "for what you did in that hearing room, for not letting me do it for you." She looked at him. "It mattered to me that it was real," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why it worked." He went down the stairs and out into the Chicago evening and walked 2 blocks to where he had parked his car himself like an ordinary person, and he sat in it for a moment before starting the engine. He thought about what she had said. "It mattered to me that it was real." I thought about all the things he had built in his life that were powerful but not real. The loyalty that was purchased, the respect that was fear, the relationships that were arrangements. He thought about how long he had lived in that world and told himself it was enough. He started the car. It wasn't going to be fast, any of this. He had done enough in his life to understand that the ledger did not balance quickly, and that there were people he had harmed who would never know his name and could not receive any accounting from him at all. That knowledge sat in him permanently heavy and correct. He was not going to outrun it. He was not going to use Rachel's goodness as a reason to feel absolved of it. What he was going to do was be worthy of the door she had opened one day at a time, starting with this one. He drove home through the city he had spent 20 years owning, and for the first time in 20 years, the city felt like somewhere he was just passing through on the way to something he hadn't built yet. He was looking forward to building it. The visits became a rhythm, not a schedule. Rachel had been careful about that, and Vincent had understood without being told. A schedule would have felt like an arrangement, and arrangements were what she had spent her whole life navigating inside other people's houses. What they had instead was a rhythm which is different, the way breathing is different from counting breaths. It happened naturally, it had its own pace, and when it was interrupted, the absence was felt without anyone needing to name it. He came on Tuesdays sometimes Saturdays, always alone, always with a knock and a wait. He brought nothing expensive. He had learned early that expensive things landed wrong in Rachel's apartment, not because she was proud, but because she was building something that was hers, and objects that cost more than she earned in a week had a way of making the building feel borrowed. He brought coffee once, from the place 2 blocks from her apartment that she had mentioned in passing 3 weeks before he showed up with it, and she had looked at the cup and then at him, and had not said anything but had opened the door wide immediately, which he was learning to read. Mia had stopped treating him like a visitor by the 4th Tuesday. This happened gradually, and then all at once, the way children shift their assessments, not because anything dramatic occurred, but because enough small things accumulated. He remembered what she was reading. He asked follow-up questions to things she'd said 2 weeks prior. When she showed him drawings, she was always drawing. He looked at them like they contained information, which they did, and he asked the right questions, which were not questions about technique or talent, but questions about what was happening in the picture and why. One Saturday in late November, she handed him a crayon and pointed to a blank corner of her current drawing and said, "You can draw something there if you want." She said it casually, the way children make enormous offers in the guise of small ones. He took the crayon. He drew something. It was not skilled. He hadn't drawn anything since he was roughly Mia's age, and even then he had not been good at it. But he drew a door, a simple rectangle with a small circle for a knob, and Mia looked at it and said, "Is that our door?" And he said yes, and she nodded as though this confirmed something she had already decided, and she took the crayon back and drew herself opening it from the inside. He looked at that picture for a long time after she went to bed. Rachel came back into the living room and found him still looking at it and sat down across from him with 2 cups of tea. Tea, always the correct temperature now, which meant she had started timing the kettle too when conversations wound down, and she looked at the drawing too. "She's decided about you," Rachel said. "I know," he said. "She doesn't decide quickly," Rachel said. "I want you to understand that. What she just did, handing you that crayon, that's not small." "I know," he said again. And the way he said it told her that he understood the weight of it completely, which was the right answer, and she looked at her tea and did not say anything else for a moment. Then she said, "How's the other thing going?" He knew what she meant. She had never used specific language about his organization. Not because she was naive about what it was, she was not naive about anything, but because she had made a decision early on that she would not pretend to be comfortable with what she was not comfortable with, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. The other thing was what she called it. And the fact that she asked at all meant she was paying attention in the way that people pay attention when they have begun to let something matter. "Slower than I'd like," he said. "Faster than it should be possible." "Are you doing it because it's right?" she said. "Or because you want to deserve this?" She gestured, meaning the apartment, meaning Maya's drawing on the table, meaning the tea. He thought about this honestly. He had learned that she could tell the difference between a considered answer and a performed one, and that she preferred the considered answer even when it was harder to say. "Both," he said. "I won't lie to you and tell you it's entirely separate from you. But I was doing it before I understood what this was." He paused. "The drawing on my desk, the one Mia made in the kitchen that first night, that started it." Rachel looked at him. "A child's drawing started it. She drew me outside a door," he said. "I had never been outside a door in my life. I walked through everything." He set down his cup. "I didn't know that was a problem until I saw it on paper." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said something he did not expect. "She drew you outside the door because she didn't know yet if you were safe," she said. "But she still drew you there. She didn't leave you out of the picture." He sat with that. "She could have drawn just the 2 of us," Rachel said. "She does that sometimes, pictures with just me and her. She chose to put you in it." She looked at him steadily. "That's what I mean about her deciding." He didn't trust his voice for a moment. He said, "She's the bravest person I've met in a very long time, including professionally." Rachel smiled, then a real one, the kind she didn't produce frequently enough for it to ever become ordinary. "Don't tell her that," she said. "She'll be impossible." He laughed. It came out before he decided to laugh, which was unusual for him, and it felt like something releasing. 4 months passed, December into January into February into a March that came in cold and left warm. The rhythm continued and deepened. He had dinner at the apartment on 3 occasions, real dinners, not events. Mia at the table doing homework, while Rachel cooked, and Vincent sat in the kitchen and talked, because that was what happened in the apartment. People were in the kitchen while food was being made. And he found this more comfortable than any meal he had eaten in a formal dining room in years. I was also in parallel doing the harder work. The federal cooperation was ongoing and carefully managed. The investigators were not asking questions about Vincent directly. They were interested in Caleb's network, in Isabella's father, in the political connections that had kept a trafficking operation funded and protected for decades. Vincent provided what they needed through channels that kept his specific involvement technical and documentable rather than confessional. Clara managed this with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of someone who had accepted that precision and patience were going to be required in large quantities for a long time. He sold 3 businesses. Not quickly would have attracted the wrong attention, but steadily through legitimate brokers for legitimate prices, converting the proceeds into holdings that required nothing from anyone that he wasn't willing to have documented and examined. Each sale was smaller than the last in the way that the last few steps of a long walk are. The destination was getting closer. Jack knew. Jack had watched all of it without comment for 4 months before he said anything. And when he finally said something, it was brief and direct, which was how Jack operated. "You're not going to miss it," Jack said one morning. Statement, not question. "The violence," Vincent said. "The power," Jack said. Vincent thought about this. "I'm not giving up power," he said. "I'm changing what I use it for." Jack looked at him for a moment. "Okay," he said. And then he went back to work because Jack understood that some decisions had been made and the appropriate response was to support them. Then came the morning, a Tuesday in late March, 7 months after the night with the roses, when Vincent woke up and understood that something had shifted in him in a way that was permanent. Not a revelation, not a single moment, just the quiet recognition, the way you recognize that you've been warm for a while without noticing when the cold stopped, that he was different in a way he could not reverse and did not want to. He made a call to his architect. Not to the estate's maintenance team, to the architect who had done the restoration work on the Caruso property 10 years ago. A man named Davis who built things with the kind of structural honesty that Vincent had always respected professionally and now wanted to apply to something personal. "The old boathouse," Vincent said. "I want to talk about what it could become." They talked for 2 hours. He went to Rachel that Thursday. He did not bring coffee. He brought nothing, which was itself a signal she would read correctly. He was not managing the atmosphere of what he was about to say. She opened the door and looked at his hands and then at his face, and she stepped back without speaking to let him in because she already understood that something was different about this visit. Mia was at school. They sat in the living room with no tea, no prop. Nothing between them except the particular intimacy of two people who have spent 7 months becoming honest with each other. "I want to show you something," he said. He placed a set of architectural drawings on the coffee table between them. "The boathouse." She looked at the drawings. She was quiet for a long moment. The plans showed a full structural renovation. The old Caruso boathouse converted completely and permanently into a community center. Not a funded by a donor who wants his name on the wall community center. Something with actual resources and actual staff and actual programming for domestic abuse survivors, single parents and household workers facing exploitation. The kind of people who spent their lives inside other people's houses and had no infrastructure of their own. The kind of people Rachel had been. "You're doing this," she said. "Yes," he said. "Not as a gesture," she said. It was not quite a question. "No," he said. "The operational funding is structured to be completely independent of me within 3 years. The board has already built. Clara helped design the governance so that I cannot control the decisions. It has to run on its own or it doesn't run at all." He paused. "The building is the beginning, not the point." She looked at the drawings for a long time. "The place where he was going to trap you," she said. "You're turning it into something for people who've been trapped." "Yes," he said. She pressed her hands flat on the drawings and was quiet for what felt like a full minute. He did not fill the silence. He had learned to sit in silences that belonged to her. "Okay," she said. "I want to be involved in the programming side, not with my name on anything I'm not looking for." She stopped. "I know what those people need. I was one of them. I want to help design what actually helps." "Yes," he said immediately. She looked at him. "You were going to ask me anyway." "Yes," he said again. She sat back. She looked at him with the expression that he had come to understand was her most honest expression, the one without any management in it, the one she wore when she had decided something. "Vincent," she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm still afraid of your world," she said. "I want you to know I haven't stopped being afraid of it. Some of what you've done, what you've been, I can't pretend I don't know about it. I can't put it in a box and call it the past and be done with it." "I know," he said. "But I also know what I've watched you do for 7 months, she said. "And I know what Mia thinks. And I know what I think." She looked at her hands on the architectural drawings. "I think you're trying to be someone worth knowing. I think that's real." She looked back at him. "And I think courage is choosing to move through the fear instead of letting it decide." He recognized his own words coming back to him. He had said them to her the night after Caleb. She had held them for 7 months, and now she was returning them, which meant she had tested them and found them to be true. "Rachel," he said, "I know what you're going to ask," she said. "Do you?" "Yes," she said. "And I need you to ask it anyway, out loud, because I need to hear you say it, and I need to say yes out loud, not just in my head." She looked at him steadily. "So ask." He leaned forward. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at her, this woman who had been on her knees in a flooded room and had stood up and never once asked anyone to carry what she could carry herself. This woman whose daughter had drawn him into a picture before she was sure he was safe, because even uncertain she had not left him out. "I want to build a life with you," he said. "Not above you, not around you, not as something you live inside of. Beside you. I want to be the person who knocks and waits. I want to be in the picture. He stopped, steadied himself. "I want to know what it feels like to actually live somewhere instead of just owning things." He looked at her. "Will you let me try?" She did not answer immediately. She sat with it for a moment, which he had expected, because she sat with everything, and it was one of the things about her that had changed him most, her refusal to perform certainty she hadn't actually arrived at. Then she said yes. One word, no performance. Just a simple, complete, entirely honest yes. He reached across and took her hand and held it the way you hold something you understand the value of carefully without gripping. They sat like that for a while. When Maya came home from school 2 hours later, she walked into the living room and found them still on the couch, talking in the low, unhurried way of people who have resolved something large and are now working through the ordinary details on the other side of it. She looked at both of them. She looked at their joined hands. She put down her backpack with the particular deliberateness of a child who is processing something significant and choosing to process it normally. Then she said, "Are you staying for dinner?" Vincent looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at him. "If that's all right," he said. "It's all right," Mia said. She picked up her backpack again. "I'm going to finish my drawing." She disappeared down the hallway. Rachel looked at Vincent. "She's going to need time," Rachel said. I know," he said. "I'm good at waiting." She almost smiled. "You weren't when I met you." "No," he said. "I learned." The months that followed were not simple. Vincent had not promised simple, and Rachel would not have believed simple. There were nights when the weight of what he had been sat in the room between them, and neither of them could move it because some things cannot be moved, only acknowledged. There were conversations that were hard in ways that required both of them to stay in the room when the easier thing would have been to walk out. There were moments when Rachel looked at something in the news connected to the part of his world he was dismantling, and the fear came back full and cold, and she did not hide it from him, and he did not minimize it, and they stayed in the conversation until it was finished. There were also Saturdays with Mia drawing at the table while Rachel cooked, and Vincent sat in the kitchen being someone he was still learning how to be. There were school pickups he attended because Mia asked him to, and he understood that the ask was its own kind of architecture. Another door, another invitation. There was the Tuesday morning in April when Mia fell asleep in the car on the way back from a drive, and Rachel looked over at her daughter's sleeping face and then at Vincent and said quietly, "She trusts you." And the weight of those 3 words was the most significant thing anyone had said to him in years. The groundbreaking for the community center happened on the first Friday in May. There was no ceremony. Vincent had been specific about this: no press, no speeches, no photographs of him at a podium associating his name with the work. The people who came were the board members, the contractors, 2 representatives from the domestic abuse advocacy organization that had agreed to co-run the programming, and Rachel. And Mia, who carried the first ceremonial shovel with both hands and then looked at it afterward and said it was heavier than it looked, which made every adult in the vicinity laugh with a genuineness that had nothing performed about it. He stood beside Rachel and watched Mia examine the shovel. "She's going to remember this," Rachel said. "I know," he said. "Is that what you wanted, for her to remember it?" "I thought about this honestly. I wanted to do something real," he said. "The memory is hers. I can't control what she makes of it." Rachel nodded slowly. "You really have changed," she said. "Working on it," he said. "Still." "I know," she said. "That's why it counts." 6 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in November, exactly 1 year after the night with the roses and the broken pitcher and the child who ran in the right direction, Vincent asked Rachel to come to the estate, not to move back, not to return to any version of what the house had been before. He asked her to come to the entrance hall, the marble floor of the east corridor, where Mia had crashed into his legs and changed everything without knowing she was doing it. Rachel came. Mia came with her, carrying the drawing, the original kitchen drawing that she had asked for back 2 months ago, because she said she wanted to give it to him properly this time. There were white roses on the floor, not many, not the lavish performative arrangement he had planned for Isabella. A dozen placed simply along the marble, no audience, no cameras, no guests. Vincent was kneeling on the floor when they walked in, not on one knee the way proposals were performed. Both knees on the exact spot where Rachel had been forced to kneel in humiliation on the night that began all of this. He had thought carefully about this and had decided it was the only honest positioning, that what he was offering was not above her and not from a height. Rachel stopped walking when she saw him. Mia looked at her mother and then at Vincent and was very still. In the way she went still, when something important was happening and she wanted to understand it correctly. "I'm kneeling here," Vincent said, "because this is the place where you were put on your knees by someone who wanted you to feel small. I need you to know that I see that I've always seen that from the moment I walked in that door." He looked up at her. "You got up. You stood up in every room after that. The mediator's room, the hearing room, my office, your own apartment. You stood up every time and you told the truth every time, and you didn't let anyone tell your story for you." He paused. "I want to spend my life being someone worth standing next to." Rachel was not crying. He had expected vaguely that she might be, but she was not. She was doing what she always did, looking at him directly, receiving what he said, completely processing it in real time without performance. "There's no contract," he said. He made sure she heard that. "No terms, no arrangement. If you want to leave, any door you enter with me stays open. That's not a promise I'm making tonight. That's the way I intend to live." He looked at her. "I'm asking you to build a life with me because I love you and because Mia drew me into a picture before I'd earned it, and I intend to spend however long it takes becoming the person who deserves to be in that picture." He reached into his jacket. A ring, small, not elaborate. He had chosen it with Clara's help over 3 deliberate visits to 3 different jewelers, looking for something that was beautiful without being a statement of wealth. Something that said thought rather than expense. "Rachel," he said, "will you marry me?" She stood in the marble entrance hall with white roses on the floor and looked at the man on both knees in front of her, and she was quiet for exactly long enough that Mia, unable to stand it, said, "Mama." "I know," Rachel said to Mia. Then she looked at Vincent. "I know," she said again, differently. She reached out and took the ring from his hand. She put it on herself. "Yes," she said, the same word she had said in the apartment. Still no performance. Still completely real. Mia stepped forward and pushed the drawing into Vincent's free hand, the one that was still extended where the ring had been. He looked down at it. She had added to it he hadn't noticed until now. The kitchen drawing had new crayon work in one corner. The tall figure that had been standing outside the door was no longer outside. He was in the doorway. Not fully inside, not in the position of someone who owned the space. Just in the doorway. Present, waiting to see if the next step was welcome. He looked at Mia. "You moved me," he said. "You moved," she corrected him very seriously. "I just drew it." He put one hand on the back of her head gently, briefly, the way you touch something you are not taking for granted. Then he stood next to Rachel in the marble corridor, and she was wearing his ring, and Mia was between them with her hands in both of theirs, and the white roses were on the floor around them, and the estate was very quiet. "What happens now?" Mia asked. "We figure it out," Rachel said. "Together," Vincent added. Mia considered this. "Okay," she said. "Can we get a dog?" Rachel closed her eyes briefly. Vincent said yes. Rachel opened her eyes and looked at him. "We didn't discuss a dog." "We can discuss it," he said. "We're going to discuss it," she confirmed. "I know," he said. And there it was, the ordinary, imperfect, genuinely human texture of a life being built by people who had chosen each other clearly and honestly, without any illusions about what the other person was, and with full knowledge of what they were building toward. Not a palace, not a performance, a life. With dogs possibly in it, and disagreements certainly in it, and a 7-year-old who drew the truth before the adults had the language for it. Outside the estate, the city of Chicago went about its business completely unaware that in a marble corridor with a dozen white roses on the floor, the most feared man in the room had learned to knock and wait, and the woman who had been forced to her knees had risen to stand beside him as an equal, and a child with a crayon had understood all of it before either of them could say it out loud. Some people spend their whole lives walking through doors that were never theirs to open. Some people spend their whole lives waiting outside doors that never open at all. The rarest thing in the world is 2 people who stand at the same threshold at the same time and choose freely and clearly and with full understanding of the cost to open it together. That is not a fairy tale. That is the only story worth telling.